Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're opening up a grim historical investigation, methodically examining the facts behind a facility so incredibly horrifying that its architects went to extraordinary lengths to just completely erase it from history. I mean, imagine a sprawling factory in the frozen north of China, but this wasn't manufacturing cars or steel. It was literally designed to mass-produce death. For 9 whole years, a group of doctors, men who had taken an oath to save lives, ran a secret program that pushed the boundaries of human cruelty further than almost anywhere else in recorded history.
Before we even get into the timeline of how this happened, we really have to confront a chilling definition. The staff at this facility used a very specific word, maruda, which translates to log. Understanding this single word is absolutely crucial because it reveals the entirely dehumanized mindset that fueled this death factory. Thousands of human beings, Chinese civilians, prisoners of war, and others, were not referred to as patients or even prisoners. They were stripped of their identity and called logs. Because, in the twisted logic of this place, a log is just something you use, right? You don't mourn a log, you certainly don't ask it for consent, you simply process it.
Part 1. A factory for death. So how does a massive, state-sponsored death factory actually come into existence?
Well, the year is 1936. Japan has invaded Manchuria, which is a vast region in northeastern China. The Imperial Army is hungry for an advantage. They're desperately seeking a biological edge to win future wars before a single soldier even reaches the battlefield. They needed a weapon, and they were willing to cross literally any moral line to get it.
And the deception they used was absolute. Officially, the facility was named the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. It sounds like a mundane, bureaucratic public health office meant to keep people safe, right? But the reality was a sprawling empire built specifically for biological warfare.
And the sheer scale of this operation was deliberately hidden in plain sight. Located in the Pingfang district near Harbin, this wasn't some small, rogue laboratory in a basement. It was comprised of 150 buildings and staffed by over 3,000 personnel. It was a massive, highly organized machine operating with full military backing.
Part 2. The architect, Shiro Ishii. To truly understand how this facility operated with such clinical ruthlessness, we have to look at the man who built it.
Shiro Ishii was a brilliant doctor. He was highly trained at one of Japan's absolute top medical universities. But instead of using his vast expertise to heal, he used it to pursue a singular, horrifying obsession: biological warfare. Ishii saw disease not as an enemy to be cured, but as a weapon to be harnessed. And under his direction, the Japanese military gave him the resources to build his twisted empire.
Part 3. The Maruda, human logs. Now we need to examine exactly what happened to the men, women, and children who were brought through those heavily guarded gates. The reality inside those walls just completely defies belief. Doctors performed vivisections on conscious patients without any anesthesia whatsoever, just to study the human body in real time. Prisoners were deliberately infected with lethal diseases like plague, cholera, and anthrax, just so the staff could observe the spread. And if the disease didn't kill the victim, the doctors did, usually to conduct autopsies while the effects of the illness were still fresh. And perhaps the most chilling fact of all, there is no record of a single survivor ever walking out of those experiments.
Part 4. Methodical biological terrorism. It's critical to grasp that this wasn't a product of battlefield chaos or unhinged rage. This was a cold, calculated, and highly methodical scientific pursuit.
Take, for example, the work of physiologist Yoshimura Hisato. He was absolutely obsessed with studying frostbite. Because Japan anticipated eventually fighting the Soviet Union in brutal Siberian winters, the military needed to know exactly how to treat frozen soldiers. So Hisato took this military objective and turned it into an organized, systematic torture program.
The clinical, sterile way they approached outright torture is just terrifying. Step 1. Prisoners were taken outside in the dead of winter, and their bare limbs were plunged into buckets of ice water until frozen completely solid. Step 2. Researchers would literally strike the frozen limb. Witnesses reported they would listen for a specific sound, a thud like a wooden plank, just to confirm the tissue was entirely frozen. And Step 3. They tested various thawing methods: hot water, open flames, or simply leaving the victim outside overnight to see what would be left. It was all recorded, measured, and written up like any standard scientific study.
And the scope of the atrocities rapidly expanded to test the absolute physical limits of human endurance.
Subjects were sealed inside pressure chambers, and the pressure was steadily increased until their bodies catastrophically failed. Living people were strapped to open stakes in testing fields to measure the exact blast radius of grenades, flamethrowers, and shrapnel. They even forced pregnancies, so doctors could study the effects of disease, trauma, and chemical exposure on a developing fetus before dissecting both the mother and the child.
The brutal indifference of this facility extended even to their own people. According to historical accounts, a Japanese lab worker who was accidentally infected with bubonic plague during weapons production received absolutely no medical aid. Rather than being treated, he was coldly vivisected by his own medical colleagues, reportedly dying mid-sentence on the operating table. It was a machine that consumed everything in the name of data.
But the horror wasn't contained to the facility itself. Unit 731 took their research into the real world through horrific field tests. They literally released plague-infected fleas and contaminated water supplies onto entirely unsuspecting Chinese towns and villages. While thousands died inside the facility, historians estimate these biological terrorism field tests brought the death toll into the hundreds of thousands. They were refining their weapons on entire civilian populations.
Part 5. Destruction and the cover-up. So, how does an operation of this magnitude remain a secret? Well, as the war turned against Japan, the story abruptly shifts from methodical experimentation to desperate, frantic erasure.
Let's walk through this timeline. By August 1945, following the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan's defeat is inevitable. Simultaneously, the Soviet Union is rapidly advancing on Manchuria, closing in on Harbin. Shiro Ishii knows exactly what awaits him if the Allies find his facility intact, so the erasure begins. He orders his men to burn every document, demolish the buildings, and execute every single remaining prisoner so there are zero witnesses. He believes he has wiped Unit 731 from the face of the earth. But the United States uncovers the truth anyway. And what happens next is without a doubt one of the darkest twists of the 20th century. Instead of prosecuting Ishii and his colleagues at a war crimes tribunal, like what happened with the Nazi doctors in Nuremberg, American officials quietly made a deal. Full immunity was granted to the architects of Unit 731. The price? All of their experimental data. Every frozen limb, every infected victim, every horrifying autopsy report was handed over to the U.S. government for a perceived Cold War advantage over the Soviets.
This starkly contrasts the outcomes. The perpetrators walked away entirely free, with full immunity. Many actually went on to build highly successful, respected careers in medicine and pharmaceuticals. Meanwhile, the truth was erased, ignored, and officially denied by the Japanese government for decades, only finally being admitted to in the 1980s. The perpetrators thrived, while the victims were buried twice, first in the ground and then in history.
It is a profoundly sobering historical fact. Unit 731 operated for 9 years. That's longer than the entire lifespan of the Third Reich. Yet if you ask most people today, they've never even heard the name. It was effectively shielded by a boring departmental name, geopolitical cover-ups, and a global silence bought and paid for with human data.
As we conclude this explainer, I want to leave you with this final, haunting question to consider. What is the true cost of scientific data? And why does history ensure we remember the horrific crimes of the Nazis, but allows the doctors of Unit 731 to slip into the shadows? The ground in Harbin still holds the secrets of a facility that turned human beings into logs, and the fact that the men responsible were never punished might just be the darkest part of this entire investigation. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the history we're taught.